Thank you very much, Jesper. And I also want to thank you all for being here and encourage you to interrupt and ask questions, and including the online folks submitting questions. This is going to be very interactive. Before we get started, I just want to thank Cecilia Mellon, who's a valued member of the advisory board of the MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative that I co-founded, and Bethany Patten here is senior director in that work and the director of what we call our Climate Pathways Project. You'll hear a little bit more about that in just a moment. So please interrupt, ask questions, challenge us. This is not going to be a presentation followed by too few minutes of question and answers. And since I am a professor in the School of Management, we always call on our students, and you are not exempted from this morning. So I may point my finger at you and ask you what you think about that issue. That's going to be the way we go. So what I'm not going to do is I am not going to give a talk about climate science or what's happening in the climate. There's no credible doubt that the climate is changing, that the principal cause of this is humans burning fossil fuels primarily, and there is no credible doubt that climate change poses grave threats to our health, our security, our prosperity, and our lives. That is not in doubt. The problem is there's no agreement, no consensus on what we should be doing about it. So there's an enormous long list of proposals that people make about their favorite solution, the silver bullet that they believe will solve the climate problem. Renewables or nuclear, or maybe we need the radical technological breakthrough of fusion or something else, or just become more efficient, or drive electric cars, or don't eat any more meat, or change the designs of our cities, put a price on carbon. Maybe we need to rely on regulation and government intervention, or just trust the free market, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we break through the confusion around this issue? What doesn't work? Well, let me put it this way. Research shows that showing people research doesn't work. So what we have been doing, besides developing rigorous models of how the climate and the economy and the energy system work, is we've developed interactive simulations. Think of them as management flight simulators. We've developed many of them over the years for helping companies, studying economic dynamics, and now climate and energy. So this one is called the En-ROADS model, Energy Rapid Overview and Decision Support System. We've been developing it over many, many years in partnership between our group at MIT, the MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative, and a nonprofit organization, Climate Interactive, which was founded by 2 MIT alumni, one of whom is my former student who directs that project to this day. So we don't have time for a detailed look at how the model works. Ask anything you like, but it is, we believe, grounded in the best available evidence and science about the economy, the energy system, and the climate. Those issues are uncertain, so you'll also see that we can change. You can ask me to change any of those assumptions. We update it often as the science and circumstances change. But the most important thing is it's interactive. I am never going to tell you what I think we ought to do to solve the climate problem. Instead, you're going to tell me, and we'll try it out live in the model and get immediate feedback. The other notable feature of the model is, unlike many of the models, spreadsheets, et cetera, that you're familiar with in the economy, in the energy system, and so forth, which are black boxes. You can't interrogate them. You can't look and see what's under the hood. Here, this is completely open. It's fully documented. If you like, and we welcome this, you can look at every equation. And so your task this morning is not only to suggest what we can do collectively to solve the climate crisis, but to criticize the model. All models are imperfect, including this one. And so I want to hear your thoughts about where it may need to be improved. And we pay careful attention to that feedback, and we work on those issues. It's also completely free, so any of you can use the model. Just go onto our website, and away you go, and share it with anybody you like. And finally, it's used by senior leaders in government and business and civil society around the world. And Bethany, would you tell us all a little bit about how that works?
Hi, nice to meet you all. So thank you for having us. So the Climate Pathways Project, which is a project that launched in about 2019 and was one of our founding members was actually Michael Sonnenfeld, who we understand is a member here as well. And the mission of the Pathways Project is to advance evidence-based climate policy through top decision makers. So while the En-ROADS model has been used, and John will show you all around the world, our focus is really on top decision makers in the government, non-government, and business space. So that means 35 US senators, over 100 members of the House, 250 of their staffers, 8 governors, mayors, members of the president's cabinet on the policy and government side. On the NGO side, we're talking about major think tanks and other trade associations, and then, of course, close to 6,000 CEOs, business leaders, in what we call this policy ecosystem, with the idea that if we can really talk to all stakeholders and help them get a better sense of the different climate dynamics, perhaps we can start to move towards solutions that can get us to that 1.5 degree mark that we're going to be trying to get to today. So good luck with that.
Thank you. And it's widely used by the public all over the world. As of the beginning of this month, over 330,000 people that we know of in 163 countries have used the model, been part of workshop or events using the simulation. There are many, many testimonials of senior leaders like John Kerry and many others in business. We're going to skip all that because we want to get you right into it. So this is what it looks like. Now, this is still a slide in PowerPoint. Let's get out of PowerPoint, and here's the simulation. It runs in any browser, and let me explain very quickly what's going on here. So what we have is a complex model of the economy, the energy system, and the climate and how they all interact. There are assumptions that go into the baseline scenario that you see here. Oh, and I should mention that it is now available in 20 languages, including Japanese. So if you want to run it in Japanese, there you go. I'm going to go back to English. And if there's a language that you think is very important here, suggest it to us, and we'll see if we can find a way to add it to the list. So what are some of the assumptions behind this? Well, first of all, the model actually begins in 1990. This graph shows total global primary energy use from 2000 to 2100 by source. Coal in brown at the bottom, petroleum in red, fossil gas in blue. In the model, we have wind, solar, hydro, geothermal. All of these are modeled separately because they have different supply curves, costs, rates of technological progress, but we add them together in the green wedge of essentially zero carbon energy. We have 3 ways to do bioenergy: from crops and crop residues, from wastes, and from wood. And then nuclear power is the thin blue line on top. The model's been very carefully calibrated to historical data. I won't spend significant time on this, but for example, from 1990 to here 2020 and going beyond, you see in the thin line is the actual cost of solar photovoltaics, which you all know has fallen dramatically as a result of learning, scale economies, technological progress. It's now significantly below 20, 30 cents per peak watt, the cheapest way to make electric power by far. And the model tracks that, replicates that extremely well. And here's global average surface temperature. So this is in degrees above pre-industrial levels. And of course, we've already warmed our world about 1.3 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And in fact, 2023, as I think you all know, was the warmest year since there have been humans on this planet. And the impact of the climate change that already 1.3 has generated is noticeable. In fact, the majority of people on the planet last year were affected in some way by climate change, adversely affected. And you can see that the temperature varies somewhat from year to year, but the model in the black line picks up the trend. We've done this calibration for literally hundreds of other variables in the economy, energy, and climate system. You can access them all and decide for yourself whether you think the model does a good job on that or not. But let's take a look at some of the baseline assumptions. So here, the projection is that global energy use is going to grow. Part of that, of course, is due to population growth. This is the UN's best prediction of population growth. 8.1 billion people on the planet today. They're saying 10.4 by 2100. And you can see how that breaks down by region here. So the developed world, United States, EU, other developed countries, including Japan, are down here. China's already peaked. India is expected to peak in the next decade. And almost all the growth is projected to be in the developing world, Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, ex-India, et cetera. Now, these assumptions are uncertain. So if you want to try something else, if you think population will be lower or higher, you just grab a slider and you change it. And as I do that, the model, the entire system, instantly resimulates and shows you what the likely impact would be on energy, the economy, greenhouse warming, et cetera. Same story for future economic growth. So this is the assumed GDP per capita by region. You can change all these assumptions. This is a fairly standard scenario that's widely used in climate modeling. And then we have technological progress as well. So this is the energy intensity of the economy. It has been improving at about 1.2% per year global average. And we're assuming that that's going to continue as the result of technological progress and shifting gradually towards a more service and information-based economy. And all these assumptions you can change, but the result of this is total energy demand globally grows, not as fast as the economy because of the technological progress, but it grows. Where's that energy coming from? Well, almost all the growth is being supplied by the renewables. And as you all know, solar, wind, et cetera, they're growing very rapidly, double-digit rates around the world. But not fast enough in this baseline scenario to drive out the fossil fuels. So whereas in Dubai, and we've had members of our team at all the UN COPs since Copenhagen. That was the first one I went to. I was in Paris with the model, and our team, Bethany, was in Dubai just recently. The Dubai Agreement called for a transition away from fossil fuels. And as you know, most countries and many companies have pledged net zero by 2050 or 40 or 60. Those are pledges, those are promises. In the model, any climate action that's been implemented as law, regulation, or action on the ground is in our baseline. So the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States. But a pledge that we're going to be net zero by 2050, that's what we call hot air. It's nothing until they take action. So that's not in here. And as a result, fossil fuels continue to dominate the energy system. And as a result, we have growing and then high greenhouse gas emissions. So that's what you see in this graph. The green band are the emissions from deforestation and land degradation. It's about 15% of total emissions today. By far, the biggest contributor to climate change is the CO2 from burning the fossil fuels. Yes, sir, please.
Just on your last point about the pledges not being in here, I wonder, do you have that sort of the pledges already built in so we could see what that overlay looks like?
That's an excellent question. And that little red dot sums up our estimate of what global greenhouse gas emissions would be in 2030, which is the end of the Paris commitment period, if every nation fully delivered on its pledge. And it's not very far below the baseline. And as I think you may know, essentially no nation on the planet is on track to meet their commitment represented by that red dot. So your job this morning is going to be to tell me what kinds of policies you would recommend or would like to explore to bend that emissions curve down. So let me go back to the breakdown here. So the gray band is the CO2 emissions from burning the coal, oil, and gas over here, and by far the largest contributor to climate change. Then you have other greenhouse gases. The yellow band are the fluorinated gases, CFCs, PFCs, sulfur hexafluoride, et cetera. very powerful warming agents with very long atmospheric lifetimes. The biggest gas after CO2 that's warming our planet is methane. That's the blue band. And then there's nitrous oxide, which primarily comes from agriculture and excessive use of synthetic fertilizer. Yes, sir, go ahead.
So is this a direct functional relationship of the fuels burnt and the effect on the warming, or have you taken certain other factors, which again, there's a lot of debate about, other factors causing turbulence in the atmosphere and changes over eons and so on? Have you accounted for some of that?
So the time frame of the model, so basic answer is yes. The time frame of the model is between now and 2100. Historically, in geological time, over hundreds and thousands and millions of years, there are variations in the climate that come from obliquity and precessional changes in the Earth's orbit. They're called Milankovitch cycles. Not relevant here because we're talking about the year 2100, which is really very close, not eons. But yes, all those factors are in there, and invite you to look at the documentation.
I meant as a control measure because, we've taken a shorter time period just for the account of understanding what's causing rise in temperature from our activity. But
So-
do we take the other factors into account?
Let me just say, first of all, I want to move to the interactive piece where you're going to be telling me what to do to bend this emissions curve down and keep warming well below 2 degrees. So I'd love to, as we say at MIT, geek out on the science with you, but I'd love to get you involved in the policy design. We can talk afterwards if there's an opportunity about some of those other issues. So greenhouse gas emissions continue at high levels through the end of the century, and the result of that is the global average temperature continues to grow. I just showed you a minute ago, we're already here at about 1.3. We breached the 1.5 aspirational target by 2030 or so, and then we breached the 2 degree maximum permittable amount that every nation in the world has agreed we can't go beyond, and every scientist agrees we can't go beyond. That happens by mid-century, and it keeps going, and we're looking at 3.3, and it would keep going after that. What's the consequence of that? It would be nothing short of catastrophic for humanity. And I understand that when I use the word catastrophe, I'm putting my reputation as a scientist on the line. The official language from the IPCC, and I'm quoting here, is over 2 degrees, 2.5, 3, and beyond would cause severe and irreversible consequences with limited ability to adapt. That's what the science language says. In plain terms, that's catastrophe. I mean, think about it this way. You're not feeling very well. You go to your doctor, they run the tests, and their doctor says, I'm sorry, but you've got a condition that's going to cause severe and irreversible consequences, and there's nothing we can do to help you. That would be a pretty dire diagnosis. That's the diagnosis for our planet, given the path that we're on. So what would the implications of that be? Here we have been tracking many, many impacts of climate change. I'm not going to go through them all, but we keep track of the acidification of the ocean from the CO2. Here's PM 2.5 emissions, most of which come from burning fossil fuels. 7 or 8 million people die prematurely worldwide from this every year, according to the WHO. To put that in perspective, 4 years after the COVID pandemic started, the estimated global death toll is 7 million. This is a COVID pandemic of death every year, and it's projected to get worse. Crop yields are expected to fall as a result of climate change. Drought, floods, extreme storms, pests increasing their range, et cetera. And these are, large double-digit declines for corn, wheat, and almost 10% for rice and soy. These 4 are the big 4 that feed almost everybody. There's many other impacts we keep track of. Deaths from extreme heat projected to grow significantly, especially in East and South Asia, because that's where it's hottest, most humid. A lot of people work outside in agriculture, and air conditioning is least available. So, and then let's talk about sea level rise. So the IPCC model that we're using here suggests about 70 centimeters of sea level rise by 2100, accelerating upward, and it would just keep going to multi-meter levels by the next few hundred years. The science here is evolving very rapidly, so everybody working in this area understands this is out of date, too low. So one of the things you can do in our model is you can change a huge range of the assumptions. I'm going to change the assumption about sea level rise. We know there's more rapid melting and collapse from Antarctica and Greenland. That gives you a meter of sea level rise by 2100. And what would that mean? Well, we partner with Climate Central, a nonprofit science think tank, and we can look at any coastal region in the world and ask, what would that 1 meter look like? So this is the Gulf Coast of the United States. Here's New Orleans and Houston. And this is what 1 meter of sea level rise means in the year 2100. Now, this is over optimistic. It's just average. It doesn't look at high tides, king tides. It doesn't look at storms. We get a lot of hurricanes here. Katrina had a 5-meter storm surge. Ian last year had a 4-meter storm surge. So now I'm adding on top of the 1 meter a storm surge of 4. And this is catastrophic for the United States and the world economy. Because, yes, Jesper.
Can you switch to token?
I can, but I don't really have time. So I'm going to let you go to the model yourself and explore Tokyo Bay. Is that okay?
Great.
So huge fraction of the oil and gas industry's infrastructure is here, including exports of LNG to the rest of the world, including here, and military bases, internet backbone, interstate highways, rail lines, as well as millions and millions of people. And this is still over optimistic because it doesn't include the extreme rainfall. The science isn't good enough yet for us to project that. But you know, in Hurricane Harvey, Houston looks dry here. In fact, much of Houston flooded because there was almost 2 meters of rain in 48 hours on top of this. I'm going to let you explore the rest, but just let's look at what happens in Shanghai with 1 meter of sea level rise and a typhoon of 4 meters, and this is total devastation. So the next issue is, what do all these harms mean for economic growth? So here's the temperature pathway, and as we get up to these intolerable levels, the impacts on the economy from what I've just showed you and the migration of climate refugees and the likelihood of civil conflict and potentially international conflict, they grow, and the economy is going to suffer. This is highly uncertain, but here's one of the well-regarded peer-reviewed studies estimating the likely damage. So the dotted line is what GDP per capita, real GDP per capita would be if climate had no further impact on the economy, which we know is wrong. And this is what it is given the damages we've just looked at. And you may say, well, gosh, the economy is still growing. Personally, I think this is over-optimistic. But let's just take it. The magnitude of these losses means hundreds of millions, if not billions of people don't rise out of poverty and join the middle class very quickly. Much more risk of food insecurity, starvation, migration, conflict. And just to put it in perspective, this little dip here, that little dip is the Great Recession, the financial crisis in 2007 and 8. That little blip there is the impact of COVID on the economy. Compared to what's coming, COVID is an insignificant blip. So your job right now, and we have about a little more than a half an hour to do this, should be enough, is tell me what you think might bend this curve down and limit the warming to well under 2 degrees. So how can you do that? Here are the policy levers. You could discourage, through various policies, coal or oil or gas. You could encourage or discourage bioenergy. Question, sir, go ahead.
I'm Hendrik Gordanker. I'm an energy advisor. One thing I'd like you to tell us a little bit about here is in this sort of base case model, you show renewable power growing, and you've said it is already the cheapest source of energy that we have. So why does coal, natural gas, and so on just continue flat? Why doesn't it get pushed out? How does the model work on that issue?
Great question. So this graph here shows the marginal cost of producing electric power from different sources. The green line is that bundle of renewables, and as you know, their costs have been falling dramatically. So already now, on average around the world, on average, renewables are cheaper than any other way to make power, including coal, which is the brown line here. But there's heterogeneity around the world. So in some places, coal is very cheap and supported by national governments. So it stays in the mix. So coal is on the way out in North America, in Europe, but it's still the dominant source in China, India, Indonesia, and other places like that. So that's, I think, the main part of the answer. These are averages, but every year these costs keep coming down. This is without subsidies. And so in many places around the world, it is now cheaper to build utility scale solar and offshore wind, planning, permitting, construction, everything, than it is to operate existing coal plants. And that's why in many parts of the world, those coal plants are simply being shut down as uneconomic. But coal is abundant and cheap and supported by many governments around the world, and that's why the base case includes such a large wedge of coal going forward. So what are you going to do about that? You could discourage the fossils. Here you could encourage, subsidize, and promote the renewables or nuclear. Here you can explore what would be the impact of a radical technological breakthrough like practical fusion power. Here you can price carbon emissions. And then in the middle, you can work on the end use side of the economy, improving the efficiency, accelerating efficiency improvements in transport, in buildings, commercial and residential, and in industry. And you can electrify those end uses. And then here you could reduce deforestation. You could plant trees where the land has previously been degraded. Here you could implement policies to work on the non-CO2 greenhouse gases. And we have 5 technological carbon dioxide removal options like direct air capture, mineralization, agricultural and other natural solutions, and so on. So what would you like to try? I'm not going to tell you what I think. You have to tell me what you want to experiment with. Yes, sir, go ahead.
I'm Tony Miller from PAG, and we do invest in solar power in Japan quite a bit. I'm not optimistic about the world getting politically consistent, but if they did and we increased the price of carbon emissions
Great.
with a dramatic carbon tax, if we could coordinate that among the world, how big a change does that make? And does that impact the other variables
Yes.
like it reduces coal and it reduces
Well,
oil
let's
and
find out. So put a price on carbon. So our estimate is that right now the average global carbon price is about 5, so 0. That's because there are countries that have carbon prices, but there's also many countries that don't, and some that heavily subsidize their fossil energy. So do you have a value in mind for the carbon price you'd like me to test in dollars per ton of CO2? 100. Okay, great. Robert's got.
I don't know the difference between 5 and 100.
Right. So many people don't. So let me put that in perspective, and I'm unfortunately going to have to use American units here. $100 per ton would be about 89 cents per gallon of gasoline. So 22 cents per liter-ish, right?
So
that's not much.
So a dollar tax on gasoline?
Yeah.
I mean, in Japan, gas is nearly $10 a gallon.
Right. So let's see what would happen if there was a global average carbon price of $100. It'll be higher in some places and a little lower in others, just as it is today. And we're at 3.3 degrees of warming. So let's see what happens. 2.7. Now I'm phasing it in over 10 years, so businesses and consumers have time to prepare. 2.7. This is an enormous, enormous impact. So you've put your finger on what may be the highest single leverage policy that we could do.
So a dollar a gallon or less than $1 a gallon is not a big deal compared to the taxes on fossil fuel, on gasoline in Europe and the United States. How about 200? How about 500?
Another 0.3 of a degree at 200. So this is a hugely effective policy. And why? Well, I think you all know why. First of all, we're still, even though the fossils are going down dramatically, they're still dominating until about 2040. And so the average price of energy goes up. So everybody, everywhere, businesses, consumers, transportation, industry, they have a huge incentive to become more efficient in how much energy they use. And there's a huge incentive for energy supply to shift away from fossil towards the low carbon, zero carbon sources. And so you see that the green wedge of the renewables dramatically expands, takes some time, but it dominates the energy mix. And that's why it's so effective. Now, I've got to raise the issue that always comes up. 200 may be politically difficult, but 100 is close to the European trading system price now. And so that actually exists for the European Union. And in some countries, it's a little higher. Now, what I'm told all the time is, of course, and especially by economists, and I have a lot of training in economics, of course, it's obvious a carbon price is the best thing to do. And then many of them fold their arms and say, but it'll never happen. So I love economics and I love economists, but they're not political scientists. And the fact of the matter is, carbon prices exist today, and anything that exists is possible. So here you see the World Bank's carbon price dashboard, showing all the countries, provinces, and states around the world that have carbon prices, including now China and Canada and parts of the United States. 73 political units, countries, provinces, states. It covers 23% of global emissions. Now, the average price is too low, and 23% is not 100%, but anything that exists is possible. And with the carbon border adjustment mechanism that the EU has passed, starting to be implemented next year, this is likely to grow. So, the other big issue that comes up around the carbon price is it's regressive. If you just put a price on carbon, it's going to hurt the low-income people in every country and the people in the developing world. So how do we solve that problem? The best solution that I've heard, and it was proposed by many economists, including former Secretary of State George Shultz, who he just passed away a few years ago, PhD in economics from MIT. And I did have the opportunity to brief him with the early version of this model some years ago. His proposal, along with former Secretary of State Jim Baker and many others on both sides of the political spectrum in the US, is you give the money back to the people as a carbon dividend. So there's trillions of dollars at $100 per ton globally that would be generated here. You give every single dollar back to the people in each of those countries that have the carbon price as a carbon dividend. So I think you all know about Oprah, right? So you get a check and you get a check and you get a check. Everybody gets their share of the money. And low-income people and people in developing countries, they have small carbon footprints. And they don't drive, they don't fly very much, they don't have big, huge houses. So they would actually get more back than their costs would go up. Affluent people like all of us, we would pay more. Our energy footprint, our carbon footprints are large, and we can afford it. No problem. That's the way to solve this problem. And by the way, from a macroeconomic point of view, giving that money back to the people means that consumption expenditure and aggregate demand remain high, so it won't harm the economy. Fantastic, high leverage policy, $100 a ton, you went from 3.3 to 2.7. The one policy to take with you to a desert island if you can only take one.
Yeah, but it's still catastrophic.
So we're not done. Jesper, you're absolutely right. 2.7 is unacceptable. The carbon price is great. It doesn't solve all, especially at a level like 100 that's possibly politically achievable. So what else should we do?
Before I give up my microphone, can we just see what 400 or 500 looks like?
Yes, we can do that. Let's see. How about 250? 2.3. We can go higher, but I'm going to run out of time if I don't move on. But even 250, which...
So do the $100 and then ramp up nuclear to make it 1.5.
Okay, so now we have another way to go. So first, before we do that, 2.7, What's happening to nuclear as the result of the carbon price? It's growing. That makes sense, right? Nuclear takes a lot of carbon to build them, steel, concrete, fuel cycle, et cetera. But once you've got them built, roughly zero carbon. So when you price the fossils higher, to their closer to their true cost, nuclear is incentivized, and we get a substantial amount more. But what if we had policies that promoted nuclear worldwide? So we have 2.65 degrees, and I'm going to put in a giant subsidy for nuclear, 7 cents per kilowatt hour. That's huge. Tax credits, loan guarantees, indemnification against risk, et cetera. So Jesper, now we have a massive expansion of nuclear worldwide. What did it do to the climate? Nothing. Why? So this is where the professor calls on you. Jonathan, you have it.
Penetration is so low.
Well, it's
Percent of the overall.
it's quite large. I mean, this is a huge amount of nuclear around the world.
No. The percent versus the entire production of energy.
So right. So there's two things going on here. The first is it takes a long time to build these plants. And in the meantime, you're still burning carbon. Just as you all know, there's a time value of money, right? You strictly prefer $1 million today than $1 million in 2030 or beyond. There's a time value of carbon. And the reason is CO2 in the atmosphere lasts half-life of 100 years. So you put a ton in the air today, it warms the planet every day for long past we're all dead. If you take a ton out in 2030, you've got all that extra warming for all that additional time. So there's a very high premium on cutting emissions quickly. And nuclear doesn't help because it just takes too long to build them. But the most important thing going on, watch what happens when I take the nuclear subsidy out to the energy mix. So here we are, we have a lot of renewables coming on. The fossils are slightly declining because of your carbon price. Now we subsidize the nuclear. You get lower fossil, but what else is happening? Look, if I make nuclear really cheap for TEPCO or any utility anywhere in the world, they're going to build more nuclear because now it's cheaper for them, and they're going to build fewer utility-scale solar and offshore wind farms. And so you cannibalize the other zero-carbon sources, and that's the main reason nuclear has essentially zero impact. So it's very expensive. Let's see what else you have in mind. Yes, sir.
Carbon sequestration or removal?
Great. So that is in the model. Let's see what's happening. So coal is on the way out already, but there's a lot of fossil gas left. Let's see if the $100 a ton carbon price has made carbon capture practical. So the answer is yes, to some extent. Now, natural gas is used in two main ways. Non-electric uses, which means heating your home, heating your business, small industries. Those are non-point sources. You cannot practically capture much of that carbon. Electric generation, though, you can capture that. And as you can see here, most of it is being captured and sequestered. So that's already happening here. But that's part of how we got to 2.65. So what else do you want to try? Yes? Electrify end uses.
Well, just electrify as much as everything as much as you can.
Great. So let's.
I mean, when you hear about people talking about renewables being such and such 100% of whatever, they're talking about electricity, 20% of primary energy use. The other 80% is a bigger concern.
Right. So let's electrify end uses. And that looks like electric vehicles, land-based vehicles. I'm not going to let you electrify aviation or waterborne shipping here, although people are working on it, and in the model you can try that. But for right now, just electrify land-based transport. And then here, electrifying buildings. So that would be switching from, say, natural gas for heating to heat pumps, ground source, air source, et cetera. So we are at 2.65. Let's massively, oh, and by the way, there's already electrification in the baseline for transport, and with the carbon price, it's somewhat accelerated, but we can do better. So let's massively subsidize, and now we've got much faster electrification of transport and of buildings and industry. And let's see what that does. We went from 2.65 to 2.54. So that's worth another tenth of a degree. Every tenth matters. Now, why isn't the impact even bigger? You still have a fair amount of fossil here. So, you know, if I buy an electric car, which I have done, 2 electric vehicles now in my household, anywhere in the United States, you're helping solve the climate problem. Emissions go down. If you buy an electric car in China today, tailpipe emissions go down, but coal plant emissions go up. And so the impact is very weak. So you have to simultaneously decarbonize the electric generation system while you're promoting end-use electrification. We've got much of the coal leaving, but not all of it. So we can add to what we've done here a phase out of all new coal infrastructure starting in 2025, and we could reduce the utilization of existing coal plants by some amount. And now you see coal leaves the system much, much faster. And now we're down to 2.49. So decarbonizing the electric system at the same time we're promoting end-use electrification is very effective. 2.49, we still need some more ideas. Go ahead.
I'm curious as to what the impact of technological carbon removal could be. What technology do you have there, and what is the expectation we can get out of that? Is it something that...
So we have here the most important carbon dioxide removal technologies people discuss: direct air capture, enhanced mineralization. You inject CO2 into basalt, for example, it becomes calcium carbonate. Nature-based solutions, no-till, low-till agriculture, using manure instead of synthetic fertilizers. There's a variety of things in the agricultural space, sequestering more carbon in soils, and biochar. So the state of play with these is there are several pilot plants for DAC in the world. Their costs are around $1,000 a ton of CO2 right now. They might get better. We have the learning curve in here, but and there are serious doubts about its scalability, but we can put a little bit in. Mineralization is way behind on this. Nature-based solutions, we can do a lot of that today. And biochar is just beginning to be developed. So I've put in, you know, some thoughts here. And each of these little wedges is how much CO2 those different technologies is removing from the atmosphere and sequestering in geological storage. And it grows, but it's similar to the nuclear story. It takes a long time to build these up, scale them, drive them down their learning curves. And in the meantime, you're still burning a lot of fossil, so the time value of carbon is delaying the impact, weakening the impact. But it gets to be pretty large. We've got almost 5 gigatons, 5 billion tons per year of carbon being removed here by around mid-century. That's a lot. So where are we? We're now at 2.43. We need some other thoughts way in the back. Yes, well, we'll go here and then we'll go there.
I think I'm very curious about the impact of each indicator changes. Do you also include the variables of population of less developing countries or population changes in more developing countries?
So one thing we could try is, what if the world implemented policies that would help the developing countries in Africa and Latin America, et cetera, slow down their rate of population growth? Now, how would you do this? It's well understood. Empowering women and girls everywhere. Education, especially for women and girls. Access to family planning and all kinds of health care. Access to better jobs. All these things are proven to delay the onset of marriage and childbearing in developing countries. And many of the UN Sustainable Development Goals speak to those issues as basic human rights issues. So what would the impact be? Well, we're at 2.43. And how much could population fall as a result of aggressive deployment of those kinds of policies? You know, even if it was 1 billion, which is enormous, very unlikely, 1 billion fewer people through these actions, 2.36, it's a very small impact. And the reason is almost all that growth that you're reducing is in the developing countries, where carbon footprints are very low today, and so minimal impact on emissions. And it takes a really long time for those policies to have an impact. because of the inertia in the population age distribution, right? Most of the people who are going to have children in the next 20 years have already been born. So wonderful thing to do for human rights reasons and empowering women, but not a climate, not high leverage on the climate. But we'll keep it there. Other suggestions? Yes, sir.
Hi, this is George Löhr. I would be curious what the impact of afforestation is. I mean, we talk a lot about technology and renewables and so on and so forth. But for instance, in Japan, people like cutting trees and so on,
right.
Like in Tokyo. So what's the impact?
Great. So there's two parts to this. First, we should slow down and stop deforestation. And let's take a look at that first. So here's the total rate of deforestation. Now, in our baseline, we are assuming, perhaps optimistically, that deforestation will gradually subside. In the current scenario, it actually falls faster. That's because at 2.4 instead of 3.3, crop yields don't fall as much, and it's not necessary to cut as much virgin rainforest in Borneo, Congo, Amazon, and other places to reduce, in order to feed the population. Plus, we lowered the population growth. So there's already a reduction in deforestation as an unintended benefit of these other actions, but it's still too much. So if we could cut that more rapidly, perhaps there, now we're down to 2.24. Now, what about afforestation, planting new trees on previously degraded land? So we're at 2.24. Let's plant hundreds of millions of trees, right? Now, I could go all the way here and plant 1 trillion trees, and you've heard of the Trillion Tree Campaign, but there's serious doubt about the land availability for that. So let's go about halfway. So we were at 2.24. 500 billion trees later, we're at 2.19. It has a pretty small impact. Why? Well, that green wedge is the amount of carbon that's being taken up by these newly planted trees. I don't know if you've ever participated in a tree planting program. I have. Anybody? The trees you planted, how big were they? Yeah, they were like this big. Almost no leaf coverage. It takes, depending on the species and where you're planting it, 50, 80, 100 plus years for them to grow big enough to be pulling a lot of CO2 out of the air, if they survive, which is less likely in a world of warming. So, same story as before, time value of carbon. Personally, I love to get out into the woods and hike as much as I possibly can. I think we should plant trees wherever it's really feasible, but it's a low leverage action on climate because of the long delay and the risks to their survival, and it takes a lot of land. So that dashed line there is the total land area of India. And it's not clear we have that much land globally without compromising food production. And the purple there, that's bioenergy with carbon capture and sequestration. Okay, 2.19, we've got a ways to go and just a few minutes to do it. So who have we not heard from? Well, have we got anybody online with questions?
Actually, yes.
Great.
What about fusion?
What about fusion? Great.
Yes. 40 years ago, this is a question from GPE, and he says, 40 years ago, they said we would have fusion in 40 years, but we haven't.
Yeah, the joke in the industry is that fusion has been 20 years away for 80 years. So maybe we can actually do this. So, when I pull this lever to simulate that, what you've done so far, all of these levers, we can do that right now today. We know what to do. The technology is pretty much in hand. This implies a radical breakthrough that nobody can guarantee will ever happen and certainly cannot be scheduled. But let's assume it happened. So we're at 2.19. Let's have a big fusion breakthrough. There's a lot of fusion power. What did it do? 2.16, almost nothing. How come? Same story as with nuclear. It takes a long time from the breakthrough in the lab to first commercial plant to scale up. So time value of carbon, you're still burning fossil in the meantime. And it squeezes out your nuclear and your renewables, which are cannibalizing other zero carbon sources of energy. So it has very low leverage here, if it can ever happen at all. And so it's pretty risky. I don't want to put all our eggs on that basket of something that may never happen. So we're still not there. What do you want to do? What else, folks? Yeah, Jonathan.
What about changing the albedo of the planet by injecting aerosols into the upper atmosphere?
Geoengineering. This is called SRM, solar radiation management. People are working on it actively. Just after Paris, we had been briefing at the UN. I briefed Ban Ki-moon, the prior Secretary General, on this. And as a result of that, we were asked by Janos Pastor, who was the Deputy Secretary General and now runs the geoengineering research and ethics program at the Carnegie Institution. We were asked to add geoengineering to the model. And we could do what you just talked about. It's easy to put that in, and it absolutely would cool the planet. What we can't model yet, the science isn't there to model, is what are the unintended harms? There's too many unknown unknowns about it. So we decided that it was unethical for us to put that into the model and show only how it might help and not be able to show how it might harm us. So what I can say about that, it's not in the model deliberately, but what I can say about that is it would block sunlight and cool the planet, but you have to do it forever. If you stop, temperatures suddenly shoot up very rapidly. This is called termination shock. And blocking the sunlight with cloud brightening and sulfate particles does nothing to stop the acidification of the ocean. And it may lead to moral hazard that encourages us to use more fossil fuels. So this is an area where I think it's treating the symptom and not the underlying cause. Now, we may get desperate enough to try it, but I certainly hope that we don't. 2.2, folks. What else do you want to do? Yes, sir.
I'd like to understand a little bit the impact of production of methane and other gas.
Okay, so reduce the other gases besides CO2. So we are at 2.19. You'll notice that already the production of especially methane is lower. Why? Because carbon price and the other actions you've taken on electrification have reduced the amount of fossil fuels, and so fugitive emissions of methane from the energy supply chain are lower. But that's not enough. Let's do more and also work on the other gases. There's ways to do that. And let's see what happens if we cut those by about half. Now we're at 1.95 actually. This is very important. The atmospheric lifetime of methane is short, 20-ish years. So if you can cut methane emissions today, you can have a big impact. So that's very high leverage, but we're just barely at 2. What else can we do? Do we have any other online? Okay, go ahead.
Reduce meat consumption, beef consumption.
Okay, we can do that. So, so first I'm going to reduce deforestation by the same amount as we had before. And now, what if people, no offense to our colleague in the room from McDonald's, all stop eating burgers? So average meat consumption today is around 30% of people's diet. And, you know, could we plausibly cut it by 1/3? I doubt it, but what would it do? It's not very high leverage. Cutting food waste would also be important. It's important to do this. Biodiversity will benefit, soil health will benefit, local communities will benefit, people's health will improve if they're not eating so much saturated fat in their diet. It's not a super high leverage policy. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, going back to the blip that we saw from COVID, I think in the first couple of months, emissions decreased by, say, 15%.
Yep.
What if we just recreated that? I mean, I'm not saying everyone has to stay at home and there's guards on the corners, but
good. So you're not in favor of another pandemic that kills people?
No. I did not say that. I said we're going to do this, rationally. whereby people literally cut back on their activities, especially those who are the most, active.
So work from home, reduce consumption, although people ordered an enormous amount of stuff from Amazon during the pandemic because they couldn't travel and go to restaurants. What we can do to model that might be to slow down economic growth a little bit. Is that a fair way to think about it?
If that's the lever that you have at the moment.
Yeah. Well, so, all right, let's do it a different way, because there's no constituency to slow down economic growth. I'm not aware of any country whose leader is willing to stand up and say, our economy is big enough already, we don't want to grow it any further. And I'm not aware of any company whose CEO is going to get on the quarterly call with the analysts and say, we're big enough, we're not going to grow anymore. So we won't do that. Instead, if people work from home and don't drive into their job, if they do the things you're suggesting, it would improve energy efficiency. Because this isn't just, so for example here, this isn't just we make cars more efficient. It does include that, but it's also mode shifting, more transit, more biking. Jesper and I are bicycle commuters, right? So we don't burn fossil fuel when we go to our jobs. And work from home would also be part of that. So let's look at energy efficiency. We are at 2. Big increase in transportation efficiency. So it's improving all the time, but we're going to speed that up. And in buildings and industry as well. And now, this is high leverage. 1.8, 0.2 of a degree here. Why is it so effective? Well, first of all, there's lots of opportunity to do this. And in the building area, built environment and industry, there's a lot of emissions coming from those activities. And although buildings last a long time, they can be retrofitted. So a very quick story on this. My house is almost 100 years old in the Boston area, very inefficient when built, very inefficient when we moved in. 8.5 years ago, we did a deep energy retrofit, which meant lots of extra insulation, really high quality windows, LED lighting everywhere, high efficiency appliances, reduced the air exfiltration by 90%, adding heat recovery ventilation so there's always fresh air in every room without losing the energy. Completely eliminated the natural gas that was heating and producing hot water, replaced that with Fujitsu air source heat pumps, and we put solar on our roof. 8.5 years later, we have made 30% more energy than we use with zero fossil fuels. So my house is now a power plant. I am a power plant, and I get paid to do that. And I have no heating bill, no electric bill. My electric utility owes me $5,400, and the annual surplus is big enough that I can now power 2 electric vehicles for free with 0 emissions. So thank you. And this is why, and it was profitable to do this, right? This is why these levers have such big impact. So here we are, folks. It's 1.8 degrees. There's other things you could do, and I invite you to experiment with the model. What I'm going to do is I'm going to capture the scenario. When you go online yourself, you can take your scenario and put it on X or LinkedIn or email it to everybody. I'm going to capture this. I'll email it to, I guess, Jesper or to you. And you can share it with everybody. When you click on that link, you'll come here and you can then try whatever else you like, because this is the collective scenario of the audience, but you may have different views. But let me make a final comment about this. First of all, what's a world of 1.8 look like compared to where we're going today, over 3 degrees? Well, first of all, we keep temperature well below 2 degrees. What else does that do? Well, air pollution is way down very quickly, because you're taking the coal and other fossils out of the system quickly. This reduces mortality around the world. It reduces morbidity. It lowers healthcare costs. It improves the performance of kids in school. This is a big win for everybody in the economy and society. And all the money saved by lower healthcare costs and the extra productivity, because people don't have lung disease and are not as sick when they're working, can drive economic growth. What else? Well, crop yields are still going to fall. Less biodiversity loss. Crop yields are still going to fall, but not by nearly as much. So risks of conflict due to mass climate migration, food insecurity, are reduced. That's good for the economy and national security everywhere. Deaths from extreme heat go way down. And most importantly, let's bring back temperature. What happens to the economy? Economic growth is greatly enhanced. So yes, it's true. These actions have short-run costs, no doubt about it. But you don't want to look just at the costs. You all know you don't evaluate an investment by just looking at the upfront costs. You look at the costs compared to the benefits. The net present value of this and the other benefits and reduction in risk from all of these harms being moderated greatly outweighs the short-run costs of doing these actions. And everything you chose to do, with the possible exception of a little bit of CDR here, we can do today with technologies we have and their expected normal rates of improvement. So congratulations, you've created a much safer world for yourselves, for your families, for your children, and for all children everywhere. I think we have a couple minutes for questions. Yeah? Please, Robert.
On your home improvements, what was the payoff period? This turns out to be very important when people make capital decisions about whether to refurbish their home.
Absolutely right.
How many years did it take for you to generate enough profits to pay off the investments?
So it's a little tricky to answer that question, partly because we did a general renovation of the home anyway, which had to be done because it had a variety of other problems. And so once you've committed to, you know, we had a 1950s kitchen, we had 1920s bathrooms. They had to be fixed anyway. We needed a new roof anyway. And so once you've committed to do those things and your walls are opened up, then the marginal cost of the insulation and et cetera is really small. So it's already paid off. But the thing that I want to say is today, we did this 8.5 years ago. Today, everything is vastly cheaper. Solar is less than half the cost of what it was 8 years ago. Heat pumps are better, cheaper. Everything is better and easier. And in many countries, the incentives, the tax credits, and the other subsidies that are available are dramatically larger. We got zero assistance except for solar. We had a solar tax credit because that's a federal law for many years, but no assistance from the electric utility or the state in subsidies. Today, there are, under the Inflation Reduction Act and in Massachusetts and other states, big subsidies. So it's much, much cheaper and much faster payoff.
Does the Empire State Building refurbishment have lessons for us here?
So what Robert's referring to is well over a decade ago, the Empire State Building, built in the 20s, went through a complete deep energy retrofit. It's dramatically more energy efficient and nicer to have an office in the building now than it ever was. That had a short payback time, and it absolutely has lessons for us. We built a new building at the Sloan School of Management. I was co-chair of the building committee and pushed for it to be as green as we could make it. Design decisions in 2005. We moved in 2010. Today, you can do much better, but that building uses 70% less energy for heating and cooling than a standard building. Today, you'd be net zero or net energy positive like my house. The net present value of what we did was almost $10 million on a $140 million building project, and the payback time was way less than a year. The upfront incremental capital cost was 0.25% of the total building cost for reasons that I'm happy to discuss with you all later. The average person thinks the upfront capital cost increment would be 20%, but the literature shows green buildings are between 0 and 5% more upfront capital. And then they lease and sell for higher premia. Go ahead.
Would a program like that, was it built into the IRA? Is this happening at some scale?
Yes. So you may be familiar with Brian Deese, who was a major figure in the Obama administration and then was the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors under Biden. He's now left the administration. He's now working with us at MIT and in partnership with an energy consulting group called the Rhodium Group. He has a website that they put together which tracks all the investments that have been generated by the IRA, the CHIPS Act, the Infrastructure Act, and it's now hundreds of billions of dollars of investment in the United States in clean energy, in batteries, and the whole panoply of climate-friendly technologies You can go online and check out that website. Just Google Brian Deese, and it'll pop right up. Yeah. Clean Investment Monitor. Thank you, Bethany.
At the risk of identifying the elephant in the room, we have an election coming up in the United States.
I hadn't heard.
I'm sure there are reasons to avoid politicizing the work you're doing, but is it possible to model the difference between a Republican win and a Democratic win? I won't.
Yes, we haven't done it, but I think, so let's just think about it this way. You can have whatever opinions you like about Mr. Trump's policies related to, the border and other things. On climate and energy, he's very clear. He will take us out of the Paris Agreement again. He wants to drill, baby, drill. He wants to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. He will take other actions that will take the US out of the game. Now, that will slow down reductions in greenhouse emissions from the United States, but far more importantly, China is the world's biggest emitter. India is number 3. There is zero chance that they will take more aggressive action if the United States withdraws and moves backwards. When John Kerry's successor talks to Beijing, they're just not going to do anything if we're not willing to take action, if the developed countries aren't willing. So the consequences globally would be to prevent what you have done here from happening, or at least happening in time. Yeah.
Thank you, Takehiro from Sophia University. My question is about the policy ecosystem influence. When you show this kind of system to the elected officials, which level, at the county level, state level, or federal level, which elected officials will be much more interested in applying to their policy-making processes? Thank you.
That's a great question. We are rigorously nonpartisan in our work, and we have briefed many senior elected officials at all levels of government from both parties. And Bethany, in fact, has been instrumental in working with the conservative Republicans in the Congress. Do you want to quickly, very quickly, because I think we're almost at time, yeah?
I mean, I think you're asking two questions. One is, just in general, what is the response at different levels of government? So to answer that question, there's no difference, really. The biggest challenge is how do you map people's local issues to the global insights that you see here? And so what we try to do is create some kind of translation conversation. So oftentimes if we're going to go into a county or a regional government, we just make sure we understand things like what is their current energy mix, what are their policies that they've already put in place, what things are just completely irrelevant, and we put those in context. In the same way, when we go and talk to a CEO of a company, one company might have a huge footprint, like building footprint, right? In which case we want to make sure that we show them that not only is energy efficiency in buildings and industry important globally, but it's that might be something that they want to focus on in their decarbonization strategy. On the sort of partisan, nonpartisan conversation, it's not that dissimilar, right? When we talk to conservatives, we talk about things like investments in rather than taxing, and so it's really just about the context of the conversation and how do you have it. But the levers that are pulled, there may be a different order in the levers. For instance, there may be more market-based solutions by some and more social solutions or behavioral solutions in other groups. But ultimately, the results are the same. Everybody realizes it's not one lever, right? It takes all kinds. And it's just, what makes the most sense when they're looking at both the contextually for themselves and then how does that map globally?
So I think we're out of time. Let me just say before your final remarks, we will get you this scenario. The model is freely available. We would encourage you to explore it further and share it with your organizations and everybody else that you think might be interested, because this touches everybody. Share it with your kids too. High school kids love it. There's really no difference between a high school kid who can learn what's going on here and a senior elected official. It's been carefully designed to be usable by everybody. So you can reach out to us to follow up. We help organizations in government, in business, develop the internal capacity through train-the-trainer kinds of programs so that they can bring it to their organizations at scale. Just let us know. Thank you all so much for your participation today. Arigato.
Professor Sterman, thank you very much.